Toastmaster this year, Miss Wanda Morris. Take a bow, Wanda. Anyway, congratulations. I'm going to start with a bio because it's so impressive that I think you need to listen to it, okay? And then we'll start with the questions, the grilling, as some people have said. All Her Little Secrets was named one of the best books of 2021 by Hudson Booksellers and selected as the #1 top pick for library reads by librarians across the country. It won 2002 Lefty Award for Best Debut Mystery and was a finalist for the 2022 Georgia Author of the Year for Best First Novel. It was also nominated for the Anthony Award, the Strand Critics Award, the McCavity Award, and the Crooks Corner. Crooks Corner Book Prize. Okay. Book 2, we've only 3. Anywhere You Run was named one of the top 10 crime fiction books of 2022 by the New York Times, no less. Take a bow, Wanda. It was also selected as one of the best books of 2022 by NPR, Publishers Weekly, Amazon, and Library Journal. It has been named as one of the 15 standout historical fiction books to read this year by Oprah Daily and received starred reviews from Publishers Weekly, Library Journal, Kirkus Reviews, and Booklist. Okay, Anywhere You Run won the 2023 Anthony Award for Best Historical Novel, the 2023 Georgia Author of the Year for Best Mystery, and the 2023 Lefty Award for Best Historical Novel. It was also nominated for the Strand Critics Award, the McCavity Award, the ITW Thriller Award, and longlisted for the prestigious Mark Twain American Voice in Literature Prize. Show off. I wanted to read that because your backstory, I think, sort of follows kind of the same trajectory as most writers. We start as readers, avid readers, and then there are decades of frustration, stress, wanting to sort of, do ourselves in. I mean, basically. But you went through that whole process. Tell us a little bit about your journey to this, because this seems like, when I read it, overnight success, everything happens so easily, but there's a lot of work, a lot of determination, a lot of struggle and sort of learning how to do this, and then continuing with the effort. So tell us a little bit about the backstory, and then I'll get into the grilling, because I've got 4 pages.
Wow. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Tracy. Thank you for that, and congratulations on your nomination.
All right, this is not about me, Wanda.
Congratulations to Tracy.
We're talking about
Best novel,
Wanda.
Yes. Gosh, my journey. You might as well slip on your PJs and your fluffy slippers, because it's a long story. But I'll make it short. I've always loved to write, even as a young girl. I've always journaled, always been writing in some form or fashion. But I wasn't exactly encouraged to become a writer when I was younger, and that's okay. I mean, I grew up during an era where you go off to college and you better major in something where you can get a job, and that's what I did. I went off and, I became a lawyer, and there's nothing wrong with that. Truly. But I never lost that yearning to tell stories, and perhaps I was telling stories in a way as a lawyer, whether you're trying to, persuade a jury or you're trying to convince a group of business leaders to do something. But I always wanted to create original stories. And for the longest, I had this character I didn't even know she was a character. I just had this person roaming around in my head. And I, kind of wondered, what would it be like if there was a woman who, her moral obligations as a sister, as a friend, clashed with her ethical obligations as a lawyer. what would happen. And for years, that always kind of rang around in my head. As I tell people, I was working in corporate America, and I'd gone to a meeting, and the meeting didn't go very well for me. I was essentially yelled at by my boss, told I was rather mediocre as a lawyer. So I went home that night, and I did what most people did. I kind of, cried in a pint of ice cream. And then I realized crying wasn't going to do me any good. And so this character kind of said, write about me. I picked pen to paper and I wrote the first scene of what became a very pivotal scene in the middle of my very first book, All Her Little Secrets. And I wrote that scene and I thought, I kind of like this. And so I kept writing more scenes, and I stayed in that job because I had to, because I had bills. My family likes to eat. My children like to be educated. So I stayed in that job, but I started writing in secret. I would get up early before I had to get the kids off to school, and I'd write for an hour or so. I'd write while I was waiting in the car for them to get out of, track practice or piano lesson. But I was writing in secret. I didn't even tell my own husband I was writing a book. And I think I did that because I still, in the back of my mind, thought, yeah, hang on to the day job. Don't necessarily bank on this. And I don't know whether I really believed in my talent. But anyway, I decided to apply to a workshop program. And I used a portion of, what was then the manuscript for All Her Little Secrets. And lo and behold, I got into the program. And then I realized, oh, wait a minute. I got into the program and I have to go away for 2 weeks. So now the jig is up, right? I got to tell my husband. So it's like, so hey, I got to go up to Connecticut for 2 weeks. He's like, what are you going up to Connecticut for 2 weeks for? I was like, so I got into this writing program. He's like, a writing program? It's like, yeah, I wrote a book. You wrote a book? It was like an echo chamber in the bedroom, right? And so he was like, well, tell me what it's about. And I told him, and he was like, ooh, that sounds good. And that was the description of All Her Little Secrets. And so, much like what all of you are doing, I went about trying to learn the craft of writing. And so, I took workshops and online courses. And then I did this online mentoring program where you work with a published author for 3 months. And then at the end of the 3 months, you submit the first page or so of your manuscript in an agent showcase. And if agents like it, then they're like, send me the full manuscript. And so in the agent showcase, I submitted the first page or so of All Her Little Secrets. And 22 agents said, I love it, send it. And all 22 rejected it. Yeah. I was pretty heartbroken after that. I was like, why am I doing this? Now, keep in mind, I had written the first scene, and then I put the book down for 7 years. I decided that it wasn't very good. I shouldn't be doing this. I already have a job. I have 3 kids. This is folly. But I'd gotten sick, and then I got better. But like most life-altering kind of things that happen in your life, it made me reevaluate what was important to me. And so why was I always thinking about becoming a writer? I should just do it. Anyway, fast forward, 22. Actually, that was just 22 rejections in a month. This book probably got something on the order of 90 rejections before I finally went to a conference. And part of the conference was a pitch fest. And by this time, every agent who represented Mystery had probably seen this manuscript in some form or fashion, right? Like, oh yeah, Wanda's still hawking that thing? But there was one, there was one or two lone agents out there, and I was like, fresh meat. And so I sat down in front of this lovely lady, and I told her about the book. And she said, send it to me. And I did, and 24 hours later, she sent me a note, and she said, I am loving this book. And she now represents me. So from the time I wrote that first scene, after that night of crying into my ice cream until All Her Little Secrets was published, was 13 years. So if you think that you can't do it, if you don't have calluses on your butt, you probably can't, because this is a tough business. It is a tough business, but it's also a declaration that you have to have stick-to-itness to stay in this game.
True. It took me over 20 years to get to where I am, but that was not wasted time. You would think it would be. I mean, 20 years, you get frustrated, you want to stop. The rejection letters pile up and pile up and pile up. You don't get any feedback as to why they rejected. Did you get any? So they just say, no, it's not for us, thank you, good luck in your future endeavors. 2 paragraphs, that's it. And I would just sort of take the letters and bam, put them aside and keep going. So those 20 years, they may sound like an expansive amount of time, but it's learning time.
Right.
Did you find that to be the case with you? I mean, 7 years you put it away, but was that 7 years that you were not thinking about it, or 7 years that it was sort of niggling at the back of your mind? The book is sitting there. I know that's what I want to do. I know that story is mine. Was it that sort of a thing, or?
I think it was exactly that sort of thing. Those 7 years that I wasn't writing the book physically, I was always thinking about it. Like Atlanta has crazy traffic. So I'm usually sitting in traffic, and I was thinking about Elise Littlejohn. That's the protagonist in my first book. And so I was always thinking about it. So I think by the time I did pick it up again, I had kind of fleshed out who she was. She's a very, very, very complicated woman, if you haven't read the book. And even during those times, like you said, where I was getting all this rejection, you know, some people were like, most people, I should say, most people were like, thank you, this is not right for me. There were a few benevolent agents who said, well, I don't understand why your character behaves this way. Or, I don't understand why she's so smart and she would act so, you know, this way. They didn't say dumb. They would say, why would she act this way? So the few benevolent ones who gave me some feedback, I would just pour it back into the book. And so I think all of that rejection just made me that much more determined to figure out, what is this book about? What am I trying to say? Am I conveying what's in my brain onto the page for readers? And so you're right, that time is well spent, because I was still thinking about that book and fleshing out that character.
Now, are you a plotter or a pantser like normal people, like me?
Oh, gosh. How you people go to a computer and just sit and write? I'm like, you're wired differently.
We walk over, we sit down in the chair. The laptop screen is empty. We have an inkling of an idea, and we go. I mean, it's ABC. I mean,
I start out with a very loose outline. When I mean, these are not Jeffrey Deaver 250-page outlines. This is like 2 or 3 pages where I kind of know what the big scenes are. I know how the book opens. I know how the story will kind of take off. I know a few twists and turns. When I start out a story, I never know how it's going to end. And that was so for my first book, too. I wrote that book, and that ending changed several times. And so I have these few kind of, you know, loose scenes written down, like, you know, Elise Littlejohn walks into the office, finds boss dead. Elise Littlejohn doesn't call police. And, you know, finds brother doing whatever. And then once I have that, and this is a quirk of mine as well, I always start my books off longhand, legal pad, blue gel ink pen. And I
That's just
write.
nuts. That's just crazy.
Yep, that would be me. And so I write maybe like the first 5, 6, maybe 7 chapters or so, and then I put that into the computer, and that is kind of like my running start, and then I can work on the book from there. Once I get like what I consider a solid rough draft, then I print that out. I'm old school. I'm a dinosaur, y'all. So I print that out, and then I take a red gel ink pen and make my revisions. Has to be red ink. It doesn't work. If I tried doing it in blue because I was on an airplane once and I had my manuscript and all I had were blue gel ink pens. I was paralyzed, y'all. I was paralyzed. I was like, oh, I can't even think anymore. So the first thing I did after I landed, right? I went and I got some red gel ink pens. I watched a movie on the flight. I couldn't revise.
That's just nuts. I want to talk about that first scene in All Her Little Secrets because I want to know the anatomy of it, how you crafted it. Because when I read it, the gasp at the end of it that I emitted was genuine because it was so well crafted. And that particular scene told us exactly what we needed to know about Elise Littlejohn. In that, I could almost sort of hear the click of the door click as she sort of left. And it sort of sets up the story from there, but we know a lot about her from that one little act. And I want to know from a writer's perspective, because I need to know how to get some of this stuff on my bio, how you went about it, what decisions you made, what things you sort of ignored, or so you didn't sort of press on that, but how you sort of got it on the page.
So you know what? Actually, it was, I have to thank all those rejections, those agents who rejected me, because like I said, the few benevolent ones who said, I don't understand how your character is Ivy League educated, because she's a lawyer in the book, she's an Ivy League educated lawyer. How she is so smart and she behaves in ways that just seem not very smart. That's essentially what they were saying. And so the book kind of opened a little differently. She always walked into that office, and there was going to be a dead body there. But she did some other things, and so it wasn't conveying, it wasn't coming across that this woman is different. Like, she's not your average lawyer. She's not your average woman. But there's some stuff that happened, obviously. And so I have to thank them because I said, okay, when you are querying agents or editors, they look at your manuscript for all of a nanosecond and decide if I'm going to move on with this or not. And so I knew that I had to do something on the first 2 pages to make somebody say, oh, okay, what the hell? And so I knew that her background was complicated. And so I made the decision that she would not call the police. She would leave that body there. And that makes you stop and say, who finds a dead body and then walks away like they never seen anything? And it draws the reader in, right? And like I said, I knew I had to show how very complicated she was in the first 2 pages because I just wasn't getting the kind of agent attention that I wanted to get. But remember, I said I wrote a very pivotal scene that occurs in the middle of the book, and that adds to her complication. And so I needed to tie that middle scene to the first scene, so that also went into crafting who she was. I always start with characters. Even though my books tend to be pacey, I always start with a character. Who is this person? What is she running from? What is she running toward? Where did she come from? What made her become the person that she is? And so with Elise Littlejohn, I knew that there was a lot in her background that she had run away from, a lot a lot of stuff. And so I needed to make sure that in crafting her story, that with each turn, because I've been told there are a few times that people gasp in that book and you're like, what is going on? I also tried to make sure that I layered it with some humanity. So when she does these things that are like out the box, you come to understand, oh, okay, that makes sense. That I don't know if I would necessarily behave that way, but I understand where she's coming from. And I try and do that with all my characters. I try and make sure that even though they are complicated and they do bizarre things, there's a layer of humanity, and there is something that drives them to behave in those ways.
And it carries through all the books. So it's not just the one gasp, it's several gasps over 3 books. You sort of put them in sort of pivotal places, right? And how do you pace? I mean, I know you've got your outline, you've got your loose outline, but do you sort of stick a pin in each one of these things, or do you sort of get them as you come to that scene, or how does it work?
I think it is, I start thinking about my books long before I write them. And so I'm thinking about a character like right now, I've just finished my 4th book, and I've already been thinking about the character in my 5th book. And so I am thinking about those characters for a long time so that when I do go to the page, I kind of have a sense of how they behave. And then the plot plays like a movie in my head. Someone asked, I was on a panel yesterday, and they asked if you do dual timelines or multiple POV, do you do them separately? Do you write one timeline and then go back and write the other? And I can't do it that way. I write it straight through. And so it's much like that with my characters. I kind of understand who they are long before I go to the page. And so when I have those kind of gaspy moments, it's because I've been thinking, oh, yeah, she's the type of woman, like in Anywhere You Run, Violet is the type of woman who does whatever she wants to do. And, people can have their opinions. That's not her business. And so if I know that's who she is, then I can build a scene around something that she does that causes people to gasp, I hope.
So character driven, most of the books, or the books. Has that ever changed? Have the character done something on the page that you didn't anticipate?
Yes, in All Her Little Secrets, remember I told you the ending of that book changed. I had a different ending for that book. And my agent, Lori Galvin, read the book. And she said, I love, love, love this book. She said, but I think the ending that you currently have has been a little overdone. And, at first I was like in love with this book, right? I was like, Lori, you are just like those other agents. You're wrong. I didn't tell her that. In my head, that's what I told her. But I was like, And I thought about it, and I was like, yeah, maybe she's right. And so I went back, and I was like, okay, what do I do? So I craft a scene near the end of the book where I was like, oh, I guess, because she is this complicated kind of person, she could do this thing. And so I put that on the page, and I was like, oh, yeah, then she could do this. And so there's an office scene, it's not a spoiler, where she is running through this office. And I literally did not know where she was going. And I was like, girl,
Where are you going?
where you going? And I'm typing, and I'm like, okay. Whew. Okay, now we just passed that office. What you gonna do? Oh, she hides under a desk. Oh my God. Well, you can't stay there. What are you gonna do? So I had her up on the roof of a building. But it was in that I thought, oh, I really don't know what I'm going to do, and that kind of came to. I think that's kind of the bit of pantser in me when I get to the end of the book and I don't know what is going to happen. But yeah.
All right. I read somewhere that you like researching. Is that true?
I do.
Idiot. Okay, so what do you like
You
most?
wonder why we're friends,
What do you
right? We're such opposites.
what do you like most? Maybe that sort of pings to your lawyer part of your brain.
Yeah, maybe
And maybe
that
that's it.
does.
So you like to go sort of into the rabbit hole, figure out how things work, the context, the historical context. Because the first book is contemporary, second book goes to 1960s Jim Crow South.
Correct.
The third book is contemporary again.
Yes.
One lawyer for the first book, lawyer for the second book, or third book, and then two sisters, complicated lives.
Yes.
So a lot of research for the 60s one, right? You got to do everything. Wardrobe,
Yes.
context, towns, little towns that they're from. The third one, Gully Geechee culture,
Yes.
which you really probably had to dive really
had to
deep
research.
into.
Yes.
Which is kind of interesting. So explain your process for that and what you enjoy most about it.
I guess, yeah, you're right. My first book was easy research, right? The first book was about a black female lawyer who worked in corporate America, right? And so that was easy research. Then with the second book, because I was going back into 1964, a different part of the country, a different setting, I knew that I didn't know enough. Like, I wasn't a walking, talking adult in 1964. So it was like, okay, well, let me just figure out what was going on. And I knew that I wanted to write something that had the underpinnings with the civil rights movement and the Summer Freedom Project, where Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner, three young men, were murdered. And so I went to a library that is in downtown Atlanta called the Auburn Avenue, or the African American Library on African American, what is that library called? The Library of African American History and Culture. There you go. Downtown Atlanta, and I kind of told them I wanted to write about this particular topic. So I started out just wanting to learn about the Summer Freedom murders, but I learned that there was a lot that led up to that. There was Medgar Evers' work on trying to get voting rights for blacks in Mississippi. And so I dug into that. And then I said, well, you can't really have 1964 unless I know what people wore and how people sounded. And so I read a lot of magazines. I listened to a lot of 1960s music. So I literally did go into a rabbit hole. Now, here's the thing. I think maybe 25% of all that research I did made it into the book, because you just can't. I mean, I'm writing thrillers, so they have to be pacey. But I think it was necessary because it helped me bring those characters to life. I mean, by reading, Jet magazine from 1963 and 1964, I got a sense of how people talked and what they were talking about. Because I was listening to James Brown and Patsy Cline, I understood what kind of music people were listening to, and I was able to drop little pieces. There's a little piece in there about Patsy Cline being on the radio when this couple is riding down the highway and they get stopped by the police, and they're an interracial couple. So I'm able to drop little things like that, but a lot of that research is really necessary because it helped me become infused with what it was like in 1964. With the Gullah Geechee community, my mother used to make this reference all the time. She's like, oh yeah, we're Gullah Geechee. And I was young, and I never even asked her about it. I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, I'm going to a party. And then, of course, now she's no longer here with us, and so I couldn't ask her, but I knew that I wanted to write about this particular topic, which is heirs property, and how people can lose very valuable land that's been in their family for generations. And it's happening at an alarming rate in the Gullah Geechee community, which is the low country of Georgia, the Carolinas, Florida. And so that meant I had to go back and do research. The Gullah Geechee community are actual descendants that are descendants of slaves that were brought to this country that still exist intact with their own language, a Creole language, their own type of music, beliefs, religious beliefs, spiritual beliefs. And so I knew I didn't know enough about that. And so I researched that. And again, just a sprinkling of that made it into the book, but it allowed me to put into the narrative actual Gullah language, actual food that is from the Gullah Geechee community. And so to me, it's important because I think it lends itself to bringing authenticity into the book.
Do you write to themes, or are you thinking about themes when you're writing? Injustice, racism, misogyny, because they're all sort of elements in each one of the books. Because you're writing about a certain region of the country at a certain time. Even with the contemporary ones, there's echoes of the things that had happened in the past. So you always sort of bringing up those things that sort of create this milieu that you're writing about. So do you think about that, or is it just character and plot, and then the other stuff sort of seeps in as you're sort of going through it?
That's a really good question. I think, people always ask me, well, how do you get your ideas? And I was saying, I don't know. But like for the third book that's coming out June 18th, What You Leave Behind, I was actually at home, doing laundry and watching the news. And there was a story about a woman who was being interviewed because she couldn't get access to FEMA funds after a hurricane had come in and destroyed her home. And the reason why she couldn't get the funds is because she couldn't prove that she owned the land and the property. This land had been in her family since the 1900s. But because they were poor, they didn't have access to wills and trust and accountants and lawyers and everybody who would help her protect this land. So whoever lived in the house, when Mama and Papa died, that's who inherited the land. And it passed down through generations like that. Now, nobody had a will to demonstrate that they'd always owned this land since the 1900s. And real estate developers come in and they can force sales. If they come in and buy a fractional share of the inheritance, then they can go to court and force a sale, and people lose valuable property that's been in their family for generations. Well, I heard this story on the news, and I was just like beside myself. I was like, how does that happen? And I'm a lawyer, and I didn't even know this much about this. And I was like, how does that happen? How do you destroy communities and take away generational wealth like that? And so it sent me on a search. And it was the same with Anywhere You Run. We had just come through the 2020 election. There was all this noise and rancor about the big lie. I live in Georgia where people waited in lines for 7, 8 hours just to get to a voting booth to vote. And I'm like, this is such an injustice. How does this? So I always say, I don't write about those things. But I think somehow deep down, I am just mortified that in 2024, these things still go on in our communities, in our country, and I just find some way to write about them. I guess if they're important to me, perhaps they'll be important to other people as well.
So, yeah. So did you ever think about maybe writing a series like normal writers?
I keep telling my agent, I'm going to write a rom-com one day. And she's like, yeah, right.
Does somebody have to die? I mean, is that sort of a thing for you?
You know what? With each book, my body count gets higher and higher. I asked my agent when I was writing this fourth book, I was like, how many dead bodies is too many dead bodies? And she said, you keep writing, I'll let you know. But, I think what I'm trying to do is examine, how we can still have hope and redemption in spite of all the inhumanity that we do to each other. When I was writing Anywhere You Run, the book opens with a prologue. And it's kind of an imagining of what took place during the murder of Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner. And when I was researching that book, this library just has tons of books and papers. And so I actually found a picture of the grave where these bodies were found and the car that was disposed of over in a river in Mississippi. And I remember going home after I saw those pictures and thinking to myself, oh my gosh, like these three men died simply because they were trying to get people to register to vote. Something that is so simple, and yet people actually died for it. And so I think to myself, how could we do these kinds of things to one another? And I think somewhere in my deep subconscious, I'm trying to explore there's got to be a better way. If I could just at least get people to have a dialogue about these issues, perhaps that's my one little piece that I leave on this earth after I'm gone.
So no series? I mean,
No series. No series, no. No.
okay.
You know what? I do. I want to write a happy. Oh, I have a happy ending in my new book coming out.
No, you don't.
Yes, I do.
No, you don't.
That's right. You read it. It's kind of happy.
For who?
Well, the girl gets the guy at the end.
Small consolation.
Okay. Yeah.
But it's good. Check it out. So what are you working on for the next thing?
Oh, y'all don't want to know about that one.
Why? What's wrong? What are you doing now?
Okay, so I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and so I'll just give you the premise of the book. Young, wealthy white couples have been found dead in their homes, and their young children are missing.
Aw. Bummer.
My books always do have some semblance of hope, and even in Anywhere You Run, right? It starts off with the murder of three people.
It does, but
It
then you
does.
did something towards the end, and I talked to you about it at one of our
did.
book events and said, why, Wanda, why? So
No.
there's hope, and then there's not hope. I mean, there's little hope, and then
This is the actual truth. When my first book was coming out, I asked Tracy if she would give me a quote, and she's gladly, yes. And so she's reading the book, and my phone buzzes, and I look down, and it's a text from Tracy, and she goes, Wanda, if you kill so-and-so in this book, I'll never speak to you. She literally sent me that. And I was like, keep reading.
yeah. It was good, though. So, what was the biggest surprise to you in this whole industry, this whole business? You wanted it for so long, the rejections, you finally got here. What's the biggest challenge now? What's the biggest surprise? What's the biggest disappointment?
Okay. So the biggest challenge is that it doesn't get easier with each book. For those of you who are aspiring, I'm just laying out the truth. Each book gets harder. I mean, for one, you want to write a better book than the last one you wrote. And so I still come to each new story and I'm like, what are words? How do I do this again? What has been the biggest surprise? How entirely welcome and giving and generous the mystery writing community is. I have never been so embraced. The biggest disappointment that I didn't start this earlier, that I didn't believe in myself enough and trust myself enough to do this earlier.
Thank you. Well, let's open it up for questions if anybody's got any for Wanda. Christina?
You've heard this question, but I'm going to tackle it too. So, Wanda, how has your writing evolved since your first book, and then how have you evolved as a writer?
You want to repeat the question?
How has your writing evolved through the years, and how have you evolved as a writer?
So how has my writing evolved? You know what? I hope it's gotten better, but I think I'm like most writers. I think with each book, I'm like, and my family will attest to this. Every time I write a book, I'm like, oh, they're gonna hate this one. Ooh, too many bodies in this one. And certainly when I wrote my sophomore book, Anywhere You Run, I was really, really concerned with that one because, it was a historical. I went to a whole nother genre. I had written something that was on the order of a legal thriller with the first book, and, who was I to go and tiptoe into this other genre? And so I think that I am always trying to push myself. The third book that comes out in June explores some paranormal in addition to being a thriller. And so I always try to make each book better than the last one I wrote. But that's hard. I'm always in doubt whether this is what people want to read. My mind goes to some very dark places. And you can't always carry a lot of people there. And so I am hoping that, I give the readers what they want. How have I evolved as a writer? I don't know. I still have those same nagging fears and doubts. I still write, a scene or a chapter or write about a character, and I'm thinking, have I done this right? Have I written with compassion? Have I done justice to this character? Because when you write about crime and death and inhumane things, you want to do it with some sense of you want to do it right so that people don't walk away and think that you just kill bodies for the sake of having dead bodies on the page, right? You're there trying to explain something. And so I am always grappling with, have I done this justice? If I'm dealing with racism and Jim Crow South, have I given this topic the respect that it deserves, and have I put it in the proper context? So. So essentially, I think the question was, as a lawyer, what skill set have I brought from being a lawyer into my writing? Is that right? Yeah. So, and how many times have I killed my boss? That was the other part of the question. And so, in terms of my in terms of my skill set, I did bring some things over from being a lawyer. When you're a lawyer, you have to beat a lot of deadlines. Like, you can't just say, oh, I'll just turn this brief in, in a week. And so I'm very good about meeting deadlines. But when you're a lawyer, you write very, very differently. And I think that's why I got a lot of those early rejections, because you're dealing in fact. And so my writing was very stilted. And so I always got dinged on that in workshops and obviously by agents. And so I had to learn how to write creatively. But I think that being a lawyer has not only given me a lot of fodder for stories, but it also gave me an opportunity, because when you're a lawyer, you tend to listen a lot, like you're interviewing witnesses and things like that. And so I tend to have an ear for dialogue. I'll be sitting in a restaurant, I hear somebody having a conversation next to me, I'm like, oh, I'm putting that in a book. In terms of how many bosses I've killed, I have, you know what's really funny? I will write about somebody, and of course, it's like an amalgam, but I've had some people who have read my books that I worked with, that are kind of based characters on, and they don't even recognize themselves. They're like, that guy was a jerk, right? It was like, yeah, wasn't he? Right? Crazy, huh? I did kill off one boss. He or she doesn't know it, and I will leave it at that. And I killed him off in a really unusual way, too.
Well, thank you, and congratulations again on your Toastmaster honor.
Thank you.
Well
Thank you,
deserved.
everybody.